Hey baker, welcome to my kitchen. I'm Brett. I am a stay-at-home mom who has run my own successful baking business from home with 2 little kids for several years now, and it has been an amazing blessing to my family to be able to have that extra income, to be able to enjoy that creativity, and to have freedom over my schedule. And after doing it for so many years, I just knew that other bakers deserved it too. And so that is why I created this channel, The Out-of-Home Baker, as a place where I can teach other bakers what I wish I had known and learned sooner so that I could have gotten to success faster. That is my goal for you, and that is why I'm here on the Out-of-Home Baker teaching what I'm teaching. And today we're talking all about dummy cakes. If you've ever seen a dummy cake, what it is just a styrofoam piece to mimic what a cake tier would look like. And there's lots of different reasons why cake dummies like this would be useful. The number one reason why they're useful for me as a baker is for practicing. It is like nearly impossible to try and spend all the time and money to practice your skills using real cake. It's expensive and it's wasteful, and we don't want to be doing that all the time. It's funny to me how sometimes we walk up to being a baker or working in the kitchen and kind of automatically assume that it's just going to happen within 1, 2, 3 tries. We're going to master it. But it really is a lot like any other skill, like playing the piano or learning to shoot a basketball. You have to practice consistently because there's muscle memory involved. There's kind of mastering the basic techniques so that you're not always worried about them, and you can focus on like the design and elevating your skills and your ability to execute cake designs. And so cake dummies give you a way to practice that is so useful and just economical, where you don't need as many supplies, you don't have to waste as many ingredients. And in fact, my signature cake design, the one that is more requested and more popular than any other cake design I've ever done, I have done it for several weddings. That signature design came because of practicing on a cake dummy, because I had things I wanted to try, I had different styles I wanted to combine, and I brought them all together, practiced on this dummy, and got a couple of nice pictures of it. And it very quickly became my most popular design and has been one of the reasons my business has come as far as it has, thanks to my ability to practice on cake dummies. I practice all the time, and I literally cannot speak for it enough. Practice, 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 and you will get better, you will get faster, you will get more efficient. Another reason people use cake dummies like this is to add extra height to a cake without wasting servings that might not be needed. Sometimes you might be having a small, intimate wedding. The bride and groom might only be having a small group, but they still want that really nice look of a tall, beautiful design of a cake. And to help minimize the waste for servings that aren't needed, you can use a foam dummy tier to help offset the ratio of servings to number of guests that are actually going to be there. So part of the cake could be real, part of it could be dummies, all of it could be a dummy. I've done weddings like that where the cake is literally just a dummy for the sake of being a centerpiece and part of the whole setup of the wedding, and they end up having different desserts. Now, one thing that I have to note right now, if you're ever going to do a cake like that for a customer or anyone where you're doing a dummy cake instead of real cake, there's 2 things you need to know right off the bat before we keep talking. Number 1, the cost should be the same. Even though you're not baking and you're not putting in the time and the ingredients, these dummies can be expensive. When you buy them as single tiers just on their own, they can sometimes be anywhere from like $10 to $20, depending on what shape and size and where you're ordering from and the shipping costs and how fast you need it. And you might not get it back depending on where it's going and whether they're going to be returning supplies to you or not. So the cost ends up evening out. Even though maybe the ingredients and the baking time, that cost isn't there for you, it's going to even out in the end. So you really should price it out just as if it's a normal cake. The real purpose of it is to not be wasteful and to not have cake that people don't need. Now, the other thing that is really important to know about cake dummies when you're doing maybe partially real and partially fake, partially styrofoam dummy, is that dummies are very light. They don't have a lot of weight to them, and so they don't hold themselves down very well. You can imagine if you have this very light base and you put heavy cake on top of it, it becomes a big hazard when you're delivering it, transporting it, moving it anywhere, because that top heavy cake is going to want to plop right over. So anytime you're doing a half dummy, half real cake, I highly, highly recommend that you make bottom tiers real and do fake dummy tiers on top, so that it can be anchored by the weight of the real cake and not have that danger of tipping. And I can tell you from experience, I tried it once and I only had to drive, it was a 4-tier cake, just a little 6-inch cake on top of 3 other dummy tiers that seemed like it would be solid. And I only had to drive it about 1 minute and 30 seconds away. I had to sit there in the back of the car just holding on to that cake for dear life because it was so top heavy. Even just the top tier was enough to keep it wobbling. So make sure that you're structurally sound, that you're either doing real on the bottom and fake on top, or you're assembling on site, because it will not be sturdy enough to drive if you're doing half and half. The last really nice use for dummy cakes is for display. Like if you're going to a bridal expo or you want to put display cakes in a shop to help market your business, maybe right next to your business cards, these are a great way to get people seeing your cake for real life. It's not a photo, it's very visceral, it's very real, and it's so cool. People don't always get to see these beautiful 3-tier cakes all decorated in beautiful styles. And so they're gonna remember it that much more. And then your marketing is gonna just elevate itself that much more when people are able to actually see examples of what you can do as a baker. And honestly, if truth be told, decorating a dummy is harder than decorating a real cake in my experience. So if you can decorate a dummy, you can decorate a real cake for sure, because there's a few advantages that real cake has over dummy cakes that we're going to talk about. When it comes to ordering your dummy cakes, you can order any different shape and size. I've got my standard set that I use. This is a 6-inch, 8-inch, and 10-inch, which mimics very well the real life shape and height of my own cakes. And that's one thing you want to shoot for when you're choosing your dummy sizes. Try and find a size that matches best what you can actually create in real life. Because if you get like extra squat ones or extra tall ones and they don't actually look like what your cakes look like, there's going to be a little bit of miscommunication when people go to order from you and they see pictures of this cake and in real life it's like a little bit shorter or a little bit taller. So these are 5 inches tall, 6-inch diameter, 5-inch tall. Each one is 5 inches tall. And you can order dummies specifically any height or width that you want. I've had ones that are 4 inches tall that are a little bit more squat. I really like the 5-inch ones. I feel like those reflect very well what my cake designs actually look like. You can see I've got this really cute little tiny one, which is just so fun. I haven't found a super real use for it yet, but I'm in love with how cute it is. This itty bitty little tiny tier. I think this is like a 3-inch little cake. And I mean, that's just fun for maybe a display for differences in height. I've got square ones that I've used for square wedding cake. This is an 8-inch and a 10-inch that are both, I believe that's 5 inches tall as well. And then they also have hexagon ones. So they come in circle, square, hexagon, and you can order in different sizes. Now, sometimes it's easier to order in a set, and sometimes you're looking for a very specific single tier. So when I want to order, there's 2 places that I go to. I either look on Amazon, which I like Amazon because I have Prime, and so I'm able to ship for free a lot of the times, and they get here pretty fast. This set is one that I found on Amazon, and I've ordered it for classes. I've ordered multiples, and I'll probably order again. I really like having lots of sets of dummies on hand so I can be practicing and be making different displays and photos. The other place that I'll order from is Webstaurant, which has a little bit higher of a shipping cost a lot of the time. But what's cool about Webstaurant is that's where I've found the most flexibility and variety in the types of sizes you can get for height and for width and for individual tiers. So that's been a really good place to shop when I'm I need a 5-inch tall, 6-inch dummy cake, or I want a 4-inch tall, 10-inch. That is where I have found lots of variety, is on Webstaurant. So those are the 2 places I order from the most. Okay, let's talk about how to actually frost and assemble this dummy cake, because honestly, there are a few tips and tricks and nuances to it that you'll want to be aware of when you start doing dummies, because it can be a little bit tricky at first. Like I said, sometimes frosting the dummy is actually harder than frosting the real cake. The first reason for that is the weight. If you're frosting a tier of this dummy, what happens when you're pulling that frosting and it's just moving all over the place because there's no weight to hold it down? That is thing number one that makes this so tricky, is that you need a way to secure it to your turntable. Otherwise, it's going to be nearly impossible to be scraping. When you do your scraper, it's just going to push it off the side, and it's very frustrating. When I first started trying to use dummies, I found that they have special turntables where you take the top off and you actually put just this little like pin, this little prick that hooks right into the dummy cake, and you basically frost it like standing on a needle, and that's what holds it into place. I wasn't interested in buying an entirely different turntable just to use cake dummies. And so I found a hack that I absolutely love and adore, and it's one of my favorite cake hacks ever. So let me show you how it works. We're gonna take our cake board. So this is a 10-inch diameter cake, and I've got a 12-inch diameter board. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take this and put it right on top. Actually, I'm gonna flip it over and I'm gonna center it as best I can. This is where this one's gonna stay. This is like a nice cake board. This is what the cake will sit on, so we can move it around, we can display it. So I'm gonna center this right there in the middle as nicely as I can, get it nice and an even rim around the whole thing. And then I'm just gonna gently turn it over. And once it's turned over, I'm gonna take a handy dandy rose nail. Now, if you've ever piped anything, you're probably familiar with these. You can find them at Joann, Hobby Lobby, on Amazon, probably even at Walmart. And they're simple tools used for piping roses and different flower decorations when you're doing piping with buttercream. They're awesome because you can use them to secure your dummy to this board, and then you'll have something to grip and hold on to as you're frosting your dummy. So I use two. If you only use one, then it's only 1 point for it to rotate around, and it'll still wiggle and be hard to work with. But two will keep it in place and it will stop it from rotating so that it will be nice and sturdy for when you're decorating. Doesn't really matter where you put them, so I'm just gonna put one right in there, and then just right across, I'm gonna put one right in here. And you just push it all the way through your board, all the way through your dummy, and voila. Now you have a dummy that you can hold on to and kind of grip it to your board, and you'll be able to move and press this around, and it's not gonna move. It's gonna stay right where it is. So as we decorate, we're gonna put each of our dummies on its own board. That way we can frost them individually the same way we would do if we were making a real cake. We will chill them and then we'll put them together. And that brings us to the second reason dummies can be a little bit tricky to work with. And it's the fact that this styrofoam, this is like insulation. This is what they use to keep things warm or keep things cold because it doesn't change temperature. It doesn't absorb heat or cold very much. It stays the temperature that it is. And if you've known anything about cake decorating, if you've been doing it for a while, you start to realize that having cold, chilled cake is very beneficial when it comes to getting smooth buttercream and nice, crisp edges. Cold cake is very critical. So we're kind of fighting against the temperature here that we can't chill this. You could put this styrofoam dummy in the freezer for a week and it's not going to get cold because it just is meant to resist temperature changes. So what I do to fight against that and to help work with it is I'll put the buttercream on and I will do the best I can to get it as smooth and as precise as I can, and then I'll chill it. And that buttercream will chill and it'll kind of create this casing for our cake dummy. And once it's chilled, we can put a little bit more buttercream on and that will be easier to work with. The chilled buttercream will do what we need it to do. So we've got a chilled surface to work on and then we can get those smooth edges and those sharp corners. When it comes to putting stuff on your dummy, literally, you can treat it just like a normal cake. You can do fondant, you can do ganache, you can do buttercream. So today, I've got my American buttercream and I start on the top. You can see I'm kind of just holding the edge of this dummy. And all you need is a thin layer, honestly. To frost this entire cake, I probably only am going to use like a single batch of buttercream. That's 4 sticks of butter. My recipe is 4 sticks of butter, a 2-pound bag of powdered sugar, a little bit vanilla, a little bit of cream. And that's all it's going to take to frost this entire 3-tier cake, which, like I said, is very economical. You don't have to waste those ingredients. So now I'm kind of gripping down here, just so that it doesn't spin too much while I'm trying to get it all across the edges. And I'm going to get it as even and as smooth as I can. And it's not going to be perfect. Definitely not at this point. The more that I've worked with dummies, the more I have acquired a bit of a muscle memory for how they move and how it reacts to the buttercream, how to move my spatula so that it goes on a little bit smoother. So I have gotten better at getting my first coat a little bit smoother and a little bit cleaner. But if yours doesn't look as smooth and clean, that's okay. We're gonna fix that. We really need that chill to help. So now I'm just gonna go around and I'm gripping it over here, just like on the edge of that board. I'm just gonna start to gently apply buttercream to the sides, just like that. If you were doing something other than buttercream, let's say you want to cover it in fondant. I did do that once. I'm not a big fondant person, but one time I covered a dummy in fondant. And what you'll want to do is have some kind of tacky substance on your dummy. It doesn't have to be buttercream. In fact, buttercream might not be so great because when it gets soft, it kind of gets smushy and it ruins that smooth finish of your fondant. But something like a ganache underneath or edible glue, just to hold that fondant in place so that it won't move and it'll stick to your dummy, because your dummy is not sticky at all and things will fall right off of it. Another thing that can be tricky as you're preparing to design a cake with dummies is that when you finish a real cake and then you go to put things on it like cake toppers or flowers or any other little inserts for decorating the cake, it's hard to insert those into cake dummies. So be aware of that as you're starting to use them, that if you want to poke in like flower stems wrapped in their plastic and their straw like you would do on a real cake, or if you wanted to put in a cake topper, it's going to be a little bit hard to get that on. And so I recommend having a dowel on hand where you can kind of poke a hole in it beforehand, create that groove, that hole for it to go in, and that way you don't have to push as hard and accidentally ruin your cake or smudge your frosting, because it takes a lot of pressure to get something into your dummy cake. Sometimes when I am working with dummy cakes, to be even more economical and time saving, if I'm just trying to practice or I'm just trying to get a feel for a design, I will decorate only the half part of it and I won't go all the way around, because when I need to get a picture of something, you really only have to see the front half of it. And like I said, if you can decorate a half dummy cake, then that's a valid representation of your skills, because that's actually a lot harder than decorating an entire real cake. That it takes a lot more skill and just refinement of muscle memory, like I said, to be able to do that. So often I will decorate just the front, and that helps me save on time and buttercream so that I can really get a feel for practicing my style, practicing colors, practicing designs that I want to practice. Okay, so now the whole dummy cake is covered in buttercream, and I'm going to use the scraper just like I would on a real cake, but remembering that there is no chill to it, and so this buttercream is still very soft, very fresh, so I'm going to be super gentle. The layer that I put on here is super light because I am going to put a second layer on to help get that smoother finish. So I'm going to be very cautious in how much buttercream I scrape off, because I don't want the foam to show through. We are going to put more on, but we don't want to just scrape that entire layer right off that we just put on. So just being super gentle. You can see that I've got my hand over here holding it, just right opposite from where my scraper is putting pressure. And it kind of tilts it a little bit, but it definitely holds it in place really nicely. We're starting to get a smooth finish. I'm going to grab a bowl so I can scrape off my scraper. One thing that is so good to know whenever you're decorating cakes is that buttercream likes to stick to buttercream. It loves to stick to itself. So if your scraper or spatula is loaded with buttercream, when you go to scrape your cake, the buttercream on your cake is going to be like, hey, I'm just going to stick back onto that. So having a clean spatula and scraper whenever you stroke your cake is really important for a clean finish. So I've got my clean bowl, and I'm just gonna make sure I'm scraping that off in between as clean as it can be to help us get that smooth, clean finish, to help the buttercream stay where it's supposed to. Just going around. And you can see there's little gaps where the buttercream maybe wasn't as even, and we can just put more buttercream on over that. You can also use colored buttercream on dummies. I do that all the time. If you leave it on for too long, sometimes it can kind of dye your cake dummy, which I'm talking like weeks you'd have to leave it on for it to really make an impact. Because these ones that I'm using today, I actually have decorated with colorful buttercream, like deep purple and pink, and they wash off really nice and white. And I'll show you how to wash a cake dummy in just a minute after we finish this one. So I'm just going around adding buttercream to all the little spots that weren't quite even, just the little gaps in the buttercream, filling in all those holes. And then we're gonna chill it instead of giving it another smooth go around. Okay, that's about as smooth as I can get it without the chill. So now I'm just gonna scrape in those little edges, and then we'll get this cake in the freezer. We'll chill it, and then we'll be ready to smooth it out just a little bit more. So I'm just gonna go around and gently grab all those little edges. And it's already getting like kind of crusty, and that's okay. We'll be able to smooth it all. So just trust in that process. Trust the magic of the freezer. Okay. That's about as smooth as I can get it for right now. So I'll show you the top. Not super smooth right now. It's like actually quite bumpy. There, can you see how it's still kind of bumpy right here? Not a super smooth finish. The sides are looking pretty good actually. So this is going in the freezer. It's gonna chill. And then I'm gonna do the same process with my smaller tiers. I have an 8-inch, which is gonna go on a 10-inch board. And for these ones, I use a thinner little like cardboard round, the kind that go in between tiers or underneath a cake. And we don't need to use a super nice one because we're actually gonna take this styrofoam tier off so we can put it on here. We don't need cardboard rounds in between because they're gonna hold their own weight. There's nothing soft and squishy that needs to be held up. It's like they're their own structure. So we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to dowel it. We don't need the boards. This is just for ease of transporting it into the freezer and being able to grip something while we decorate it. So I'm gonna do the same thing where I put 2 rose nails. Let's make sure that's pretty even. We're gonna take it off so it doesn't matter if it's really centered, but it does help the frosting process if you have it mostly centered on your turntable. And we'll just put 2 more rose nails into the bottom of that. And then we're gonna decorate this one, and we're gonna do the same with our 6-inch. So once they're all decorated, once they're all frosted and chilled, we're gonna take them out and I will show you how to stack them. Now that this cake has been chilling in the freezer for about 15 minutes, it's ready to add a little bit of more buttercream so we can try and smooth out some of those rougher edges. So I'm just gonna apply it a little bit on top and start to smooth out some of those kinks. So we have a nice smooth surface to stack our other cake tiers on top of. Now, when you're chilling your cakes in the freezer, one thing you'll start to notice is that if you leave them in for too long, you'll start to get condensation on your cake. It'll start to sweat, and we definitely don't want that. they just have a tendency to collect the moisture in the air a little bit more, a little bit quicker. So if you're gonna chill your cake, I would leave it in the freezer for about 15, 20 minutes, and then after that, move it to the fridge, and it'll stay chilled, but it won't collect all of that moisture like it will in the freezer. Now, because we are working with foam, like we said before, it doesn't hold the chill that it needs to. So this is going to get warm really fast, which is why I left the other 2 tiers in the freezer. If I were to pull them out, they would get too soft again before I could really work with them and smooth them out. So we're gonna work 1 tier at a time and just keeping them in the freezer in between, otherwise they will just get super soft again. All right, going around with our scraper. Before I started working again, I did clean off my scraper and my spatula. So I had a fresh, clean start working with this cake dummy. All right, scraping in those edges. Nice and clean in between. I'm gonna add a little bit to the side now. I can still see some of the foam poking through, so we're just gonna cover that up. We're just gonna cover up that foam that's kind of showing through down there at the bottom. Cover up those darker spots. Try and get a nice even coat on the cake. Holding that tightly, the board to the turntable, gripping them both, and just turning it and smoothing it. I scraped off too much. I scraped it right back down to the foam again. So careful. Okay, now that this one is nice and smoothed out, you can see that it really helped get a smoother top on our cake and sharper edges. We're all set to go, but I need to do the same thing to my other 2 tiers before we stack them. So this is going back in the freezer so that it doesn't get soft, and I'm gonna do each of the other tiers doing the same thing. Okay, now each of the tiers has been smoothed. The 6-inch is still in my freezer chilling, and I've got the 10-inch and the 8-inch. We are gonna stack these together, and it works a lot like stacking a normal cake. The only thing is we don't have to dowel anything, but we do want to secure them together because the weight of this foam cake, this foam tier, is not gonna be enough to stop it from moving around. We still want them to be connected so that they hold together and don't just like flop apart. So what I do is I insert 3 toothpicks in a bit of a triangle on each tier, and then we're gonna just gently push it down. And you wanna work fast because the longer these sit out, the more smushy it'll get, and we don't want it to be smushy when we push it in. So I'm gonna push these toothpicks in as straight up and down as I can. If it even slightly is crooked when you push it in, that'll make it want to just bounce up when we try and push it, and you'll get a bit of a gap, which is fixable, but we want to get it as flat as possible. So as straight up and down as I can, I'm pushing toothpicks in pretty far down. We only need a little bit sticking up in order to hook these tiers together. So 1, 2, and then 3. Again, as straight up and down as I can, just leaving a little bit left. Okay, and now I'm going to take my clean angled spatula, and we are just going to slide it under this 8-inch. But first, before I forget, we've got to take out these rose nails that are on the bottom. right? Because those are securing the foam to this board. We want to take this board off. So I'm actually just going to use my spatula to kind of pry under. Maybe use my nails first. I don't have very good fingernails, so sometimes that can be a little bit tricky to get under. Let's see if I can pop that under. I'm going to use my smaller, thinner spatula to get under there. Just kind of pry it loose. There we go. Okay, one nail out, one to go. Okay. Got the second one out. Ooh. These rose nails are serrated, and so sometimes they claw in a little bit more than the smooth rose nails do. Okay, move the little foam bits out of the way. Alrighty, go our smooth side. So I'm just gonna slide my spatula under to help pick it up, but then it should come up pretty easily. Now, because we're hooking these into these little toothpicks, we kind of have one shot to really get it in the right spot. So I'm just actually gonna rest it on the toothpicks and then move it to where I want it to go. And it is getting soft, so I'll have to smooth a little bit over it, but that looks pretty good. Push it down, and voila. So I am gonna take my spatula and just smooth out some of those spots where I touched and where it got a little bit sticky. Now, if this was a cake for a customer, I'd obviously be wearing gloves when I do this, and it would be a little more chilled than this foam that gets melty so fast. Okay, so we've got our two tiers together. Now I'm gonna go grab the 6-inch and we'll put the 6-inch on top too. We've got our 6-inch cake and we're gonna pry those rose nails off. Same as we just did. Use your spatula, kind of get it. All right, here it comes. Got that serrated bit. Be so careful not to throw it. That's like the tendency. You're gonna tug down on that and wanna just like chuck it backwards. There's been times when I've been working with cake dummies and I've forgotten it's a cake dummy and gone to pick up this 3-tier thing with all my muscles and just about chucked it across my kitchen because I forgot that it doesn't weigh very much. So it kind of is like a trick to your eye, thinking that it's gonna be heavy and it's really not. Okay, we've got that. Got a nice front side. I'm just gonna slide it under and it pops right off. And oh, before we do that, we gotta put our toothpicks in again to secure it. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'm gonna push them in. Now you wanna keep this little triangle of toothpicks inside the diameter of the cake. So it's 6 inches, so slightly inside, because we don't want it to like be way out here where the cake's not even gonna touch it. So 1, 2, 3, as straight up and down as I can, just in a nice little triangle. And only a little bit's poking up. Okay, so now we can get the cake. I'm gonna aim it where I want it, just kind of rest it for a sec. And that looks pretty good. One more jump. All right. And now the cake is put together. So these seams right here are not perfect. They're a little bit bumpy. There's no big gaps. Now, if you have any big gaps or it's not quite level, it's because either your toothpicks were kind of crooked and so your tier went a little bit this way, or you weren't perfectly level on top of your styrofoam tier that we frosted. So what you can do is just kind of shape out the top one until it sits flat. You can add buttercream to the side that's maybe a little bit crooked. And if you have any gaps, we're gonna seal them up with just a little bag of buttercream with a small opening, about 1/4 inch. It's not very big of an opening because we just wanna put a little bit of buttercream around each of these tiers where they connect to seal up that gap and make it look really clean and smooth and nice. So we'll use this, and then we're gonna use this. This is my best buddy when it comes to stacking tiered cakes. It is a palette knife, and it has this beautiful right angle. When you hold it like this, what it becomes is like a little scraper. Perfect for getting into those cracks and smoothing them out so that you've got this seamless, just nice flow of buttercream that doesn't look bumpy. It just seals it up so nice. So I'm going to take my buttercream and I am just going to put a small thin amount around the base of this cake. And then I just take my little palette knife. I put it right up against my cake, almost as if it was a scraper, just so that that angle is right in the crack. It's at like a 45-degree angle. It's not straight out perpendicular to your cake. We kind of tilt it so that it'll softly, gently smoosh in that buttercream and seal up that gap. So I'm just gonna go around a few times, keeping it clean in between. Okay, and I'm actually gonna turn it the other way and smooth the bits on the bottom. And then if you still have little lines that are bothering you that you want to smooth them in, I'll just take this and gently blend them in to the rest of the buttercream. Softly, super gently coax it a little bit at a time so that we can blend in that line. It may be good to know as well that the buttercream I'm using today is old buttercream. Whenever I teach a class or have a cake order and I have extra buttercream, I store it in little Tupperwares in my fridge, knowing that it's extra. I kind of label it so that I know it's not usable, but I save it so that I can practice with it. And again, it just helps not be wasteful and puts to good use any extra supplies that you have. So now we've got a nice, smooth, sealed cake that is perfectly ready for practicing and decorating and doing all sorts of designs. Now this cake, you could keep it frosted like this for weeks. The buttercream will crust and it'll get hard. You will start to notice a slightly darker color as the buttercream oxidizes. That's kind of like when you cut an apple and it starts as a light color and then gets browner and darker the longer it sits. That's from the oxygen reacting with the different sugars and things inside the apple. And when the fat and the butter gets oxidized, it darkens, and you've probably seen that. So the longer this sits, the more it will darken. If you are doing different colors, darker colors are gonna get darker, lighter colors are gonna fade. And so just keep that in mind. If you're wanting this to last longer, you might have to adjust what stuff you're using, the different decor, because buttercream and colored buttercream is going to kind of change color the longer it sits. But this will be good for like at least a week before it starts to change color, especially if you keep it in the fridge. If you keep it in the fridge, it'll help keep those colors where they need to be. But I've kept dummy cakes as long as like a year, and I probably shouldn't have. It doesn't really do anything to the foam. It just starts to be a little bit gross and you can't really use them or display them anymore. But when you're ready to clean it, let's talk about how you do that. You can clean your dummy cake when it's still soft like this, or after it's kind of crusted, you can also scrape it off like that. Honestly, sometimes I prefer it when it's already dried out and crusted, and it becomes really easy to just kind of scrape it off all as one piece. It just kind of flakes off. But you definitely want to get all the buttercream off that you can before you ever put it in the sink, because this butter is going to solidify inside your pipes. Even if you melt it and it looks like it's all washed away, what's going to happen is once it cools inside your plumbing, it's just going to start to congeal and stick around the edges, and it can really, really mess up your pipes in your house. So minimize the amount of buttercream you're putting down the drain. Try to put as much in the trash as you can and then rinse off any extra residue, but that will save your house from having plumbing issues. So when you go to scrape this off, you want to use a scraper or a knife or even a spoon, something that is not so sharp. I don't tend to use my metal scraper because what happens is it'll cut into that foam, and you want to be careful not to cut into the foam. We don't want chunks of foam coming off that ruin your dummies and that go down the sink. Like, foam is just a disaster. So be very gentle when you're scraping it off. I will usually just lay out a trash bag. I'll cut it open so that it's kind of covered in plastic on my table. I'll put it on that and I just gently scrape off, being so careful not to cut into my dummy. Then each of those tiers goes into the sink and I gently wipe them and scrub them with warm soapy water and a very soft scrub, like a rag or like a little bit of a foam sponge. Nothing too abrasive because again, it will start to tear away that foam. You want to be so, so gentle. Once you've rinsed off all the residue, I lay them out on the counter, I put down a towel and I just set them on the towel so that they can air dry. The foam kind of acts like a sponge and it'll soak some of the water in because it's very porous and there's lots of little holes. So you want time for that to just kind of drain and drip out and just air dry so that it's completely dry and not holding in any of that moisture residue. So now you know just about everything there is to know about cake dummies and you're set to start using them so you can practice. You can use them with your customers and have displays, all of the great ways to be able to use cake dummies.